Hi, this is Peter Teuscher. I'm here with Toby Dempker. Thanks for joining us for another podcast where we talk about personal development, professional development, and organizational development, and maybe some philosophy, all things in between. We really just pick a topic and see where the conversation takes us. And so we're ready to have another conversation today. Thanks for everyone for joining us. And Toby, you've got a great topic for us today.
Yeah, okay, so I chose this week, and because I had so much fun last time when we talked about curiosity, so I thought let's continue on that path. But we can widen the scope a bit, so I thought we could talk about learning. And learning, I mean, that can be all from individual learning to organizational learning to team learning to learn, educate. I mean, it relates to a lot of interesting stuff. Um, but I mean, as I'm speaking, I'm thinking a starting position might be, I mean, why is it important? And when I teach in HR and I look at what organizations are looking for and looking at these kind of reports, it seems very, very clear that now and probably even more in the future, learning to learn and having the will to learn is a real, not game changer, but I mean it's a really crucial skill and mindset and attitude to have if you want to stay um, competitive in the labor market, and if you want to continue to develop. And so it's a necessity, but of course there's a lot of benefits from on a life perspective, what's enjoyable, and it can probably enrich in your life in many ways as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely essential. And I agree with you. The days where you go to school, uh, go to university, if you do that, and then get your job, and then that's the end of your learning journey, those days are long over. I think for you and I, obviously, in our professions, there's constant ongoing learning and keeping yourself up to date. There's just we live in such a fast-paced world that continues to change, and I think even on a personal level, if your professional life does not require you to continue to learn, then just keeping up with technology and day-to-day
Mm,
life. So I agree. I think ongoing learning is a part of life that I think continues to accelerate, and
mm,
it becomes essential at every stage in life. But I think the thing that a lot of people miss around learning is that it's not just. I think this is something that I find kind of sad about our education system. It's a lot of work. It's
mm,
considered work, and I think that I'm always going back to the whole piece around flow and so on,
mm,
and so learning is an important part of that, your own growth. And I think people who are learners and people who grow are happier people. So I think it's not only about keeping up with the fast paced world we live in. Learning new things, I think is creates a lot of satisfaction in life, and it creates a lot of happiness. So I think
mm.
why is learning important? You mentioned a lot of good things. I just wanted to put out there that if you want to be happy, it's really important to keep learning. If you think happiness is getting enough money to retire early and sitting on the beach and sipping cocktails, you'll
Mm.
find quickly that leads to boredom. And if you're not learning, I don't think you're going to be nearly as happy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting mindset to develop as well. I mean, this what you mentioned, retire early, go to the beach, sit and drink cocktails. Is that interesting for a lot of people anymore? I mean, of course it is for a few individuals, but I think that's becoming less and less. I mean, people are in their discretionary time, people are focusing and investing a lot in learning on all different kind of platforms, of course. I mean, and that's what's so great about learning today, that you don't have to go to participate in a formal education. You don't have to take a degree. I mean, just by yeah, DIY sort of learning or doing it yourself and watching Google and YouTube stuff, you can learn a lot just from that. And then these platforms where you can share information and knowledge. I mean, there's amazing the amount of learning that happens there. And you're not paid for it and you don't get a degree, but yeah.
No, the opportunities for learning are so abundant now. The amount
Mm,
of information out there is so great that I think if you're not, you're really missing out. I mean, I use Udemy. I use a number of different platforms. I've used Skillshare.
mm,
Even, whenever I don't know how to do something, my go-to is, what does YouTube say? Who's the expert on YouTube? So, and also, it's there's just really no excuse. And I mean, although it's not my preferred mode of learning, but obviously books are really essential. I find
mm,
I'm more of an auditory learner, and so I tend to listen to a lot of audiobooks.
mm,
And YouTube's great for that, the visual aspect as well. And then from there, I'd like to be very kinesthetic, like learning by doing. But for the most part, auditory is great. If I had a teacher or lecturer that was really engaging, I didn't even need to study, absorbed so much
mm.
through that. So I think that's maybe a place that I'd like to start, is just understanding learning styles. So
Sure.
obviously the four, maybe not everyone's aware of it, but the four learning styles: visual, audio, reading and writing, and kinesthetic. So
Mm,
for some people, it's writing things down, like taking notes and reading and so on, is really the best way to absorb information. That's the way they study and so on.
mm,
For some people, being very visual, watching instructional things or watching someone demonstrate something, or even if you're having to read and take notes, using a highlighter. And for some people, it's just that being able to have a conversation like we're doing,
mm,
which, I mean, that's the great thing about podcasts, is the fact that you can, in almost any environment, that you don't have to engage with someone else. You can be listening to a podcast and be getting information. So I think knowing the learning styles is really good.
mm,
And I think defining what learning is really important, because I remember when I came to Germany, and I've got friends with kids, and it's like, well, he's learning right now. And I saw what their child was doing was memorizing a bunch of information that
mhm,
would then be regurgitated at some point, and then once it was no longer needed, you never go back to it again.
mm,
I think that's kind of the educational model that we've had for a long time. It's about memorizing as much information as you can, and then being able to regurgitate it in a way that that is expected in your standardized test.
mm,
So I know education's evolving, and it's not just like that anymore. But the just working to get a grade, to get a piece of paper, is no longer enough. I think we need more
mm,
understanding. We need knowledge and wisdom, and hopefully, the educational system will catch up. But I think with people who are interested in learning, it's really gaining understanding. And this is why, people who are learning things in their own time, their motivation is not, well, I've got to know, I've got to go through the process so that I get the piece of paper that says that I know how to do this.
mm,
They really want a better understanding. They want to, feel they can make a greater impact, or feel, they've learned a new skill. So,
mm.
yeah, I just wanted to, do you have any other points about learning styles and how to best learn?
Yeah, well, okay, my mind was going somewhere else, but let's get back to that. Yeah, when I mean, in our profession, when we're doing learning interventions or workshops or training courses or whatever it is, I mean, we at least I think a lot of us utilize some kind of framework to think about, how can we implement different kind of learning styles, different media, etc. And I mean, me and I think a lot of people go back to David Kolb, and experience-based learning, and I think Mumford and Honey later also developed learning styles based on that, and there it's called. what is it, active experimenting, what is it, visualizing, and yeah, and then it's abstract thinking and active experimenting. And so when designing these kind of interventions, thinking about how can we create an experience where you can really feel something, and then based on that experience, how can you add some information either through audio, as you were saying, or visible, some kind of maybe a document or something to write on or to read on to, because some people learn better by just by reading or writing or something.
Mm.
And then relating that to some kind of theory, what is it called, abstract conceptualizing or abstract theorizing, where you can put it in a framework. You can make sense of it in the sense of a theory or a model or something like that. Um, but then I think for most people, and then that's what we talk about a lot in HR trainings, that the experimenting, that's the crucial part, to really get your hands dirty and trying something. That's where you can implement the knowledge. And I remember I was on training with you, and you said something, like the best way to learn is just to teach it, right? And I really agree with that. That when you just to look at, hear about something and or read about something, that's one thing. But when you have to explain it in a way so others understand it, I mean, then you really internalize it, right?
Absolutely.
For me, that's been also a really valuable lesson to learn. So if there's something, if I need to teach a topic or present a topic that I actually don't know that much about, it's a great learning opportunity, because I know that at the end of the day, if I have to describe this or to make it reasonable for other people, in that process, I'm going to internalize it and learn it as well, and that's so rewarding. And then when it really clicks, it's for me, that's a fantastic sense of achievement. Oh, yeah, this makes sense. It's great.
Yeah, that's whenever I gain any new information or learn something new, I always, as soon as possible, try to explain it or teach it to someone else. I find when you're passing it on, it just helps to anchor that information in yourself. And even repetitively, teaching a subject, it causes you to reconsider and to always build your understanding or refine your understanding of whatever you're talking about. So absolutely, I think teaching other people or sharing the information or explaining to someone else, it makes a huge difference. And I think the other thing that we have, I think one of the things that stops us from learning is we have our own beliefs and limitations. So, we have this, I'm not good at that, I'm not that kind of a person, or there's these assumptions that we make as you get older. It's not as, it's harder to learn. And we know now that, the more you engage the brain, it helps neuroplasticity, which is your ability to make new connections in the brain, and to actually, that's not the definition of neuroplasticity. I think it's I'm not going to try and define it because I know I'll get it wrong. But we had these assumptions that you couldn't produce new brain cells, and you couldn't as you get older, it becomes more difficult for you to learn new things, like learn new languages and so on. And that since then, obviously you can absorb more. At a younger age, you've got a lot of curiosity. You don't have as many things occupying your mind. You have less habitual thoughts and connections. So, but I do think that we do put a lot of barriers in our own way for learning. We make a lot of assumptions. We have developed a lot of biases. We jump to conclusions. It's the opposite of curiosity and just kind of being very open, right? So I think being in the right learning state is a really important thing to consider as you learn new topics. But as we talked about in our last session, curiosity is a really fundamental driver to learning. And so always approaching things from a curiosity perspective rather than, I've got to learn this new thing. Always trying to find that one little nugget or that one little thing that intrigues you, and then all of a sudden, you delve into it, even if the rest wasn't as interesting for you.
Yeah, Yeah, definitely. I mean, it really taps into having that curious mindset, and are you willing to learn something? And of course, sometimes I also feel like, oh, learning can be tough, it can be boring. So, how can you make it more interesting? How can you make it more efficient? And I've what's her name? Barbara Oakley. She talks a lot about this. She wrote a book. I think that it's called like Learning to Learn, or Thinking About Learning, or something like that. And she talks about like how you can be in a very focused state, where you're really focused on something, and your brain is working really really hard, and the synapses in your brain, they're really really connected, and you're obviously very focused and concentrating to learn this new thing. But if you get stuck in this sense, I mean, it can be stressful. It's really tough. So it's really important to get into, I think she calls it the diffused state or something like that, where basically you're just much more relaxed. And what happens apparently then in your brain is that the spaces in between kind of open up, so you can access different areas to your brain, and therefore sort of making more connections with the problem that you're trying to solve. So what she's saying, I guess, is mixing between this focus state as well as this diffuse state where you're relaxing and thinking about something else. So just plowing through text to learn as much as possible. That doesn't work it doesn't work for all people, but it doesn't, it's not a sustainable way of working. You also need to take that walk or sit down and think about something else, or I mean, I guess that's one of the reasons why meditation is so popular nowadays, that you can sort of wander off and think about new things. But as I think a lot of people have this experience of coming back from a thinking session or a walk or a run or something, and you sit down with a problem and you look at it with new eyes, it's just like, oh, now it makes sense. And that's, so being able to mix different ways of learning and not just staring blindly at the problem all the time.
Absolutely.
Mm,
Getting
mm,
yourself in the right state for learning is really important.
mm,
And like there are a whole bunch of physiological things that interfere with your, your ability to learn. And that's why
mm,
nutrition for kids is so important, but also for adults. If you're, if you haven't been fueling your body, and you haven't been getting enough sleep, you haven't been doing the things to take care of yourself, it's really hard to learn well. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And just to your point about the right mental state, and trying to be absolutely super focused for long periods of time, not really possible, right? So I'm trying to, as you were saying that, I was drawing a blank on who I was listening to talking about learning sprints. Right, so
mhm,
you take you do these sprints of work or gathering information, like any kind of focused application, whether it's some work that you're trying to do or something that you're trying to learn. You can
mm,
do these intense periods, and then you let that kind of sink in, and you contemplate it, and then you come back for another sprint, right? You can break
yeah,
it down. But
mm,
if you're trying to cram for something, and trying, you're never going to get it all in. And that's why these kind of taking in some information and then discussing it, like the way we're
mm,
doing it right now, like these sessions we have, it's always a learning experience for me as well,
mm,
because we come from somewhat different backgrounds, and so invariably we'll each bring something to the table that the other didn't know, and then just having the back and forth and having the discussion,
mm,
really, it raises my curiosity, it gets me interested,
mm,
and it takes me into a tangent that I might not have been. And so I think this is the real barrier as we get older. We have a lot of assumptions, we have these a way of seeing the world. We may have certain mindsets, and that will dictate sort of the direction we go in our learning, and we'll be closed off to certain other elements that could be beneficial. That once you network these ideas together, all of a sudden you've got a greater understanding, and learning has happened, right? So,
yeah,
and the other thing that I wanted to say about the kind of roadblocks, because I just mentioned the word, the mindset thing, and we've talked before about Carol Dweck and her work on mindset, and this has been proven in kids, and it certainly applies to adults. But there's if you think that you've got to be kind of born with the knowledge, and you see this in management, people are expected that, well, they get promoted into a management position, they're automatically going to be a good leader, right? Or they're going to develop into a good leader just because they've been given the authority, and that's not the way it works, right? So you're not born with the information. You need to gain the skills somehow through practice, but also through maybe mentoring, through consulting with peers who've got more experience. So you gain the experience, you gain the knowledge, then you have the experience, and then you become proficient. And so I think so mindset, the way you approach things, and recognizing that this isn't something that you necessarily are going to know intuitively, and just really being open. So this growth mindset. So this idea that, well, I'm just bad at this, naturally bad at this, or I'm not good with numbers, or this is the fixed mindset. Whereas, sorry, I feel like I've got a sneeze coming on. Pardon me?
You're allowed, and that's fine.
So having this growth mindset where, well, just because I don't know it now, I can acquire the knowledge. All I need is the right information, the right conditions to take it in, and then the ability to practice it and try it out. I think from getting information to then being able to contemplate it, actually put it into practice, that's where you go to knowledge and experience. So so it's important to look at that, how your learning process works, knowing what the best learning style is for you, making sure the conditions are right for learning. I think those are all things that are important to consider.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you just opened a lot of thoughts in me as well. But one thing to start with there is we talked about these focus sprints, and then that's something that I mentioned Barbara Oakley, and that I learned that from her. She calls it the Pomodoro
Technique.
technique, yeah. And I utilize that a lot. I think it's fantastic now because maybe we're a bit alike like that our minds can wander off and think about different things.
Yeah.
But then when you need to really focus, to have a timer, just put it on 25 minutes, and during that time just focus. And even if you notice that your mind wanders off, just bring it back in and focus for this 25 minutes. And for me, what usually happens after those 25 minutes, I'm getting into it, so I want to continue anyway. But I think that's been really, really helpful for me when I feel, sometimes you're just dealing with something, a problem or something that you need to go through that is not, you're just procrastinating, or you want to put it off a bit. So that's been really, really helpful for me.
Yeah, I think time management tools also work for learning management, managing your learning. So I think, and I'm drawing a blank on the author, but there's a book that I read a while back called Undistractable, and so it's not about having a to-do list, or in the case of learning, I've got to learn this list of things. It's about dedicating a certain amount of time. So the Pomodoro technique's one of those, but rather than having a to-do list in life or in your learning, it's really about setting time aside that you're not going to be distracted, and that those windows can grow as you become more focused. But it is something you train yourself to do, and so to become a good learner, there are a lot of really good tips and tricks. And another guy that's really good at teaching this stuff is Jim Quick. He's he teaches a lot of good memory techniques, but also ways to overcome your barriers to learning.
Yeah, another one that I thought of was Erickson. He talked about the 10,000. What's it called? The 10,000 hour rule or idea.
Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell really made it popular in his book Outliers, but
okay.
I think the way he presented it was not the same way as Erickson, but yeah, it's been. It's become a little bit controversial, but definitely enough hours of practicing a certain thing will make you more proficient at it, as long as it's
Mm.
quality focused practice.
Exactly, and I think that's the key there. I mean, that where how how focused is it? What how do you measure quality? But also, what I read another book of him called Peak, where he really challenges this assumption of talent. You know that if you're just talented in something, then you can become good at it. And it's really for him, he's really mentioning and emphasizing the effort of focus training and feedback on the training. So like having a focus, but constantly making sure that you get feedback on your progress and your development and what you're doing good or what you can develop, and that how much that accelerates the learning. So, I mean, and just think about, I mean, if we take an example, okay, I want to learn to make a good pasta carbonara, and I can stand home in my kitchen and do, 365 different types of pasta carbonaras in a year. And if I just doing that and I'm referring to myself, to my own taste buds, that's great. If I do that and have an access to 10 Italian chefs that can give me productive feedback on that, it's going to be a very, very, very different learning curve, right? So just putting yourself, or if you want to learn something, making sure that you have access to a platform where you can get qualitative feedback. That he's really emphasizing that point.
Yeah, and I think that kind of segues into the importance of mentoring.
Hmm.
I think that's super important. Someone who's had the experience has been there. There's just so much to learn, and we live in a culture that values youth, and there's so much to learn from people who've had a lot of experience.
Mm.
So I think mentoring is really important, and I encourage if in life, either seek out a mentor or be a mentor, right? And it's part of this circle of learning. So if you're a mentor, you will grow and learn from mentoring others. And if you aren't mentoring someone, find someone to be mentored by. I mean,
Mm.
and it's not always an age thing. It's an experience thing. But it's always someone with little experience, like my aunt, she she's 82, and she up until Easter, April, she didn't have any internet. She just, oh,
Mm.
I don't need a computer, I don't need it. And anyway, I finally convinced her, and so I mean, she's 82. I'm a lot younger, and so I'm mentoring her on her iPad and all the
Yeah. Mm.
all the technology. So it's about having relevant experience, and so it's not always about age, but certainly with age you gain a lot of experience, right?
Mm.
With age,
Sure.
you also gain a lot of opinions, and your opinions will narrow your focus and your willingness to consider certain things. So, I
Mm.
think it's an important point about learning. So, at a young age, you're far more open and impressionable and taking in lots of different things. As you get older, you restrict the amount of, well, you know what your interests are, or you think you do, and you limit the amount of things that you expose yourself to. So it's about finding that, as you get older, being, working to be open to new ideas and learning them.
Mm.
Whereas when you're younger, it's like, what do I focus on? I can't take in everything, and sort of being focused and methodical about learning, not just being a jack of all trades, but getting really
Mm.
good at a couple of things or one or two.
Mm.
I think that the where you are in life plays a role in how you approach learning as well.
Yeah, yeah, and also what your motivation is. I mean, I think we talked about this before, but I mean, we think about certain scientists that they need to become. I mean, they have a need to become real experts in their field, so they can only focus so much attention to their field. So, I mean, how much extra information from other fields and from other perspectives can you actually take in? Can you afford to that? So that becomes kind of a trade-off there. I don't want to say what's right and wrong, but I think that that's one important thing when that is important when we're talking about learning, sort of on a leisure or leisure level that we're talking about. When you're learning from YouTube or Google or something, that there's a lot of other different perspectives out there. So not making knowledge or learning into an opinion, but trying to foster that mindset that okay, I'm learning something, but there's always different perspectives to it as well, and be open to those kind of perspectives. And I think that what you mentioned about sort of reverse mentoring there, that's a really nice example of that. When if it's a very experienced CEO in an organization becomes mentored by a new talent in the organization that have a big generational gap and very different perspective things on what you focus on and see things. I think that's really that demonstrates that kind of willingness to open up and learn from different perspectives.
Yeah, I think openness is a really big element to learning. So that's a good point. And I mean, openness is one of the big 5 personality traits, right? So and openness to experience. So I think not everybody's going to be the same there, but working at having a degree of openness and recognizing some of your biases and so on, that'll help you overcome some of your barriers to learn, right?
Yeah. Because what I see is, and we talked a lot about polarization in the world, but maybe I've referred to this before, but in one exercise that I do in one of the programs that I'm involved in is that we ask people to take a yes or no stand for a controversial topic that is work related.
Mm-hmm.
And then we put a piece of tape on the ground, so we draw a line, and we tell people so try to argue with your opponents, so they will come over to your side. And obviously, of course, that never ever happens. I mean, what happens is that you cement your own opinion further and further, so people stand further and further away from each other, because it's physically set up this way, right? What I'm pointing out here is that, like, institutions and systems that we set up can really be obstructing that kind of learning as well, because we're not interested. The point is not to understand the other individual. I mean, look at the British Parliament. Look how it's physically set up. I mean, you have 2 teams shouting at each other. You're not going to create understanding in an environment like that. It's just to ventilize or demonstrate your opinion and cement that. So, I mean, from a systemic point of view, how can you, zoom in, zoom out? Using these kind of techniques, how can you use the interpersonal relations, find connections, and try to see things from different perspectives? I think there's a lot of there's a mindset there that we can learn a lot from as well.
I agree, and that when it comes to organizational learning, because we've talked a lot about individual learning, and when it comes to organizational learning, it's how we learn as a society and grow and improve. I think those are some really important points, because, and you see it now during this period of COVID. But even I've seen it in people talking about the way academia has become. There are kind of the gatekeepers. There are kind of there's these established ways of thinking that if you're an outlier, or you have sort of a contrary opinion, you're not allowed to pursue it because you're ridiculed, and we label people. I mean, look. Even in the current health state that we're in, people who have concerns about the vaccine are called anti-vaxxers. They're labeled as such. So there's like virtue in, and then there's people who are posting their kind of vaccine passport on Facebook, going, as if it's kind of a virtual signaling. So, and then you have all these different specialists that that have maybe different views, but only there's only a viewpoint that you're allowed to have, because this is the one right way. And I think the way to come up with the best ideas is to have debates and have discussions. And so when there's a monopoly on, so people will talk about follow the science until it's not convenient for their political ideology, right? So I think in organizational learning, it's recognizing your blind spots, and making sure that it's not authority dictating, this is what you should be learning. This is, this is valid information. This isn't. Obviously, we also live in a time where there's a lot of misinformation, and that's politically motivated, or people have their own agendas. But I think we can't treat people like they're little kids that can't, discern truth from fiction. Although it is hard, you just need to do the work. And we live in an information that have so much. We live in a time when there's so much information. It's overload, and people are so, either they're distracted by all of the entertainment that they're have on offer, or they're just overwhelmed with all the things they've got going on in life and don't have time to investigate. They want someone of authority to just tell them what the answer is. And I think it's important that each of us takes responsibility for our own learning, and make sure that we we have access to a lot of information, and to learn critical thinking skills, and not to just take everything at face value, and to be willing, as you said, how could I steel man this? So how could I look at it from the contrary point of view? So I have an opinion. What if someone who has another opinion, how would they argue, right? And so doing these exercises are really important. And then making sure that as an organization, there are ideas that should be off limits. I think that things that are overtly racist, or things that are discriminatory, or things that are hateful, those are clear. But then there are other ideas that that's on the fringes. But when we start to narrow what's allowed to be discussed and debated, that stands in the way of learning. That stands in the way of us being able to learn as a society, as the human race, but also within organizations. If we're not allowed to follow certain avenues or even investigate certain information, we're limiting our ability to learn. And I think that's quite tragic when there are certain narratives and agendas that are put out there where this is the only thing that you're allowed to. Everything else is, if you even consider that path of thinking, then you're on you're on the wrong track, or you're one of the bad people, or whatever. And I think information is information. We need to sort through it. We need to discuss it. We need to look at the pros and cons, and we need to stop ridiculing people for having. When you look at the most revolutionary ideas, they came from people who may have been ostracized in the beginning. Look at Galileo, and what do you mean that the Earth revolves around the sun? The Earth's not the center of the universe, and everything else. I can see it with my own eyes. But and these people were, by the church or whoever they were, by that authority, were sometimes severely punished because they were pursuing, and hopefully we have evolved beyond in our thinking and our ability to see the world. We've evolved beyond that, because if we want to learn from our mistakes, and we want to learn, accelerate our learning and have a better understanding of the world, I think we need to be open to having conversations and discussing things that that go outside the norm. What I find really sad is, in Germany, there was a name for people who could think out of the box and who were heterodox thinkers, and they were called Querdenker. So that means kind of a, I guess, I hope I'm translating it properly, but it's quer is like kind of diagonal, or like it's kind of crossways in the same way that we in English talk about outside the box. And so these people who go to demonstrations against the vaccine or whatever, or against the COVID restrictions, they're calling themselves Querdenker, and now, so that that label's been given to anyone who doesn't follow the mainstream narrative. It's like, well,
Okay.
we need people who think outside the box, and all of a sudden it becomes a negative to be one of these people. And well, instead of going, well, how are they coming to that conclusion, and how can I just having some empathy, or trying to put yourself in other people's shoes rather than labeling them right away. And these are all things that interfere with our ability as cultures, as organizations, to learn and grow.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down, what I think a lot of what you're saying here is that it comes down to the willing to listen to others. I mean, we talk a lot about active listening in our profession, but if you're having a debate, are you actually listening to the other people's perspectives or opinions? I mean, if very often we're not, and then we're not going to learn anything anyway. So that's a good starting point. Maybe, are you
Were you
willing
sitting
to
on
listen?
were you sitting in on my communication workshop? This is exactly what happens. While the other person is talking, the other person, the person listening is not really listening. They're formulating their arguments or their responses before they've even listened to what the other person has said. So, sorry,
Yeah.
Go ahead. I didn't want to cut you off there.
Yeah. No, but that kind of demonstrates what kind of conversations we are having here. I think we are both here because we want to learn, and as we said, sort of internalize some thoughts that we might have. And I'm curious to hear about your perspective on things. And we're not debating what's right and wrong, but I don't know what we're taking away from this, but hopefully it's something. I mean, I'm always learning something.
Yeah.
But so yeah, are you willing to listen to what the other person is saying, and how can you maybe ask questions about it, and then try to internalize it and really try to understand? I mean, that for me, that's fundament for learning in these kind of contexts, of course.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting what you're saying about if it's as a nation or a culture or as a team and organization, what kind of, I don't want to say institutions, so let's say values or criteria do you have that you can sort of lean on to create a context for a constructive learning environment? And I think we're in the Western world, sometimes we're struggling with this now, that we have our certain values, but we're trying to maybe erode some of them because there are certain elements that we can't talk about. And I think if we put this in a team context, I find it really helpful when you have very clear ideas about what do we stand for as a team and how do we operate within this system. And that can be based on values or certain, I mean, some teams that I work with, we have learning contracts or team contracts of this is how we behave, this is what's allowed, what's not allowed. And it creates a clear framework for how we can have discussions and how we should foster learning in our team, so we can utilize that diversity that we might have in the team to allow for what is it, querdenkers?
Exactly. Well, but this is
allow
what
for different perspectives. Yeah.
Absolutely. When you look at what Lencioni talks about with his 5 dysfunctions of the team, so if you're talking about team learning and even team functioning together, trust is the foundation, because if you don't have trust, then you are afraid to have conflict. In other words, afraid to debate issues, and then you don't commit, and so on. So, and I absolutely agree with you. I think that if you, in an environment of fear is another one of these things that's a roadblock to learning, right? Because then you become very conservative in your thinking, and you block off any kind of, you don't look left and right. And so if there's fear, you're afraid to sort of put your opinion out there because someone will be ridiculing you, and then both of you lose because you could both be learning from each other's perspectives, right? Or if you have this element of fear where someone, ignorance is the cause of so many of our problems in our personal lives, in life, in organizations, in the world globally. Ignorance is such a problem. That's why learning is so important. But if we create a stigma and we create fear, and so people are afraid to, they have this idea in their head, and if they share it and they're shot down right away and ridiculed, well, then it gets rid of this. No, you've got to fall in line. You've got to believe the mainstream. Then that person may just shut down and resent it. They may hold their. I mean, ignorance is what drives a lot of prejudice and so on. So I think that if you can try to, like you say, bring someone across that line, even if you can't bring them across the line, at least you've hopefully inspired them to think things through, and maybe they'll come across the line down the road. But if you just label someone, like, think about it with kids. If you just, well, you don't get it, you're stupid. Like, imagine putting that kind of a label on someone and what that's going to do to their ability to learn down the road. And so if you're telling yourself you're stupid or you don't know how to do things, that's going to be a major roadblock to your learning, because your own negative self-talk and inner dialogue. So if you're doing it to if someone comes to you with an idea and you right away shoot them down, rather than trying to understand and then sharing your viewpoint, and maybe you can help expand their worldview, or their expand their understanding of a certain topic. And so that's why I being very, very well aware of my own cognitive biases, I try and expose myself to contrary views. If there's something that I find I'm very invested in as an idea, I will seek out people who have the opposite opinion, just in order to see where my blind spots are, or at least to try and understand why someone's so passionate about something that seems to me so obviously wrong, right? So if we can adopt these approaches to information in a bit more open and curious way, and a more empathetic way, without labeling and judging people right away, I think it's going to help our own learning. It's going to help our organizational learning, and it's going to help us as a society.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's I was thinking about a very powerful question that I came across a while ago. It's like, when was the last time you changed your mind? And I mean, when I think about that, it's, first of all, it's very difficult to think about. Yeah, the first initial, I don't change my mind. I'm very sure about what I think. But of course, we've all changed our minds. But then, what are the conditions that allow you to change your mind? I mean, it can be a very strong argument, or a new knowledge, or new information, or whatever it is. But I think that's a really powerful question to play around with. I don't know if you've used something like that in your coaching, but for me, it was a very powerful question that really made me thinking about, how open am I really to new ideas?
Yeah, it depends on the topic. You can change my mind pretty easily with compelling arguments, but there are some things where if I've done a lot of my own research and I've taken a lot of time to think about it, or I've had a lot of my own experience, right? You try and convince people, and you made this point earlier. I think you did anyway. It was the connection with learning and that emotional component of learning, because that's when we have an emotional experience, it anchors a memory far stronger than if we just experienced something or got some knowledge. But if you can tie an emotion to it, it anchors it much more deeply. And so, sorry, where was I right before that? I talked myself into a corner. No, there was a really important point I wanted to make on this, on the emotional piece.
Yeah.
I struggle sometimes. I too many thoughts at once. No, but I mean, in terms of this is now I remember what I was going to talk. So sometimes this is why you can't reach people with just information, with just data, right? You can't reach people. You can't help them learn with just, here are the facts, because And then there are other people who go like you look at statistics about something, and then I was listening to an interview, and they were talking about a doctor about COVID and vaccines and so on, and that the person doing the interview was saying, well, do you know anybody? Because I know two people who have had this effect from the vaccine, and so so you could see it was a, personal experience isn't statistically relevant, right? It may be automatically you have our assumption that, well, if I've experienced it, then it probably is more common than that. But but the thing is, that's why, coming from a sales background in the past, you make emotional arguments. That's how you convince people, and so learning being a good teacher to some degree is there was Ogmandino, I think his name is. The world's greatest salesman, and he, talking about it was a bit of a spiritual book. So, but the greatest salesman is also the greatest teacher. So being able to, you're selling ideas in some ways, and you'd sell things by adding an emotional component. So, I guess, sorry, I got off track there and I lost my own train of thought. But the emotional component is not to be underestimated, and that's why when we're really passionate about a subject, it's easier for us to learn, right? So we're interested in it, but we have this emotional connection to it. When you look at the amount of doctors that I've seen, well, I became a doctor because my brother or family member died or got this disease, and so it got me interested in. And so their emotion and their led to their curiosity and their willingness to learn and become really good at something. And so we may have an experience. When you look at sports, right? The reason we become good at something is because we're we become very passionate. There's an emotional connection to it. I play basketball and I still try and improve my game because I have an emotional connection to the sport. The reason that I constantly reading books and listening to podcasts about personal development is because I've been on my own personal development journey for life is a personal development journey, but consciously I've been on this journey for going on 25 years, and so I have this emotional attachment to. I've seen my own growth, and so I'm very passionate about gaining as much knowledge and also passing it on to others, helping people through the coaching process and helping organizations through the coaching process. So I think that you can't take away the emotional aspect of it. So that's where I see the difference of just providing information and learning. There needs we're human beings. We need that emotional context, right?
Yeah. I mean, what you're doing right now is also, I mean, you're demonstrating some of your passions and you're passing on emotions just by talking about this. I mean, I can see you smiling and your body language and the tone of your voice.
I'm an emotional guy.
Yeah, no, but you can feel that you have a passion for it. And that's also very inspiring and influential, right? I mean, I think we can all think about teachers who were able to connect on that emotional level, and and then you become willing to learn. Oh, now it's actually, I mean, I can remember very clearly, and I talked to my son about this just a few days ago, because he was thinking that when he studies Swedish, it's not his favorite subject. And I told him about my story when I was in high school, that I had a teacher who made Swedish come alive, and talking about the authors and then some really, key literature, and really made us understand it on an emotional level. And then it becomes so much more fun. So, and yeah, we had a lot of long discussion about that, and he became a little bit more curious about it. And I think he was able to at least try to explore that a little bit more. But what I'm saying is that emotions are definitely important, not only in learning but also definitely in teaching. What kind of emotions do you transfer and plant in other people? So from both perspectives, emotions are very, very important.
Absolutely. So I mean, teaching is not just passing on information. It's helping. It's helping meeting people where they are and then bringing them a step further, right? I think if you can bring them closer to understanding, that's the ultimate goal. It's not just information, it's understanding. And if the more understanding that we have, just the better we will be able to navigate life, the more harmonious we will be. I mean, just even when I think about something like relationships and how I've evolved over the years. I was actually contemplating this not too long ago, but the things that we learn about ourselves and learn about other people, it's just this constant learning journey. And if we get too stuck in our ideas, I know these are the things I know about the world, and I don't need to know anything else. And that's going back to your whole thing about ultra specialization that we have. You have these people with PhDs that have trouble in just some of the simplest daily things in life, that maybe you can't do their own. Well, I probably couldn't do my own tax return either, but but just doing simple things are they're overwhelmed by it. But you talk to them about, I don't know, quantum physics or molecular biology, and they can talk to you for hours about it. So I think and some of the historic philosophers, or the old Greek philosophers in Socrates and Plato's times, they saw a lot of value in a broad understanding of life and not just super specialized. So I think and it's a necessity in life, because there's so much information. In order to get good at anything, you have to be super specialized. You have to filter out things, but be careful what you filter out, because that's, having a broad understanding of the world is as important as having very specific knowledge. Because coming from a systemic perspective, right, understanding the relationships things have to one another. So because I'm an expert, because I'm an epidemiologist, right, that doesn't mean that the guy who's a biologist can't have some kind of it's a related field, so doesn't mean that they can't have an opinion. So we listen a lot to experts, but even experts have an opinion that isn't always right. So even experts can learn, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, we talked about vertical learning and horizontal learning, and that there's maybe it probably looks different for all of us, but there is some kind of balance there that can be healthy. I mean, how much of horizontal learning? I mean, learning about different kind of stuff do you need, and how much do you need to go deep, learning about a certain subject, but also about yourself, right? And you talk a lot about your personal development, your personal journey, and I think that's something that we all are both of us are very, very interested in and looking at a lot. And when you're talking about leadership development, you can't really you have to talk about your own vertical learning. I mean, how deep do you go? How much self-awareness do you have? How much do you understand about yourself? And I mean, tying into emotional intelligence, the impact you have on others, etc., etc. So, yeah, both. I think there's a balance there that is important. We need both. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why in systemic principles you talk about zoom in, zoom out, right? You can be very specialized on something, but it's also important not to lose the big picture, right? So we've covered a lot of stuff, and I actually went in areas I wasn't expecting to go today, but but I'd say maybe we can just kind of sum up some of the key points for people to take away. But actually, before we jump to that, my own cutoff, I'm jumping over it. I think the thing about it, I think it's important to remember, and I want to say this in case we have any younger listeners who are looking at their own future, but institutional learning is one thing, and I think it's just important to know under what conditions you learn the best. And I don't think university is for everyone. I think it's very valuable. I think learning in general, we wouldn't be having this conversation if I didn't think learning was very important. But there's more than one right way to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether it's experientially and I remember I had a job interview many years ago for a fairly senior position, and the HR director said to me, "Well, all the other candidates have these qualifications and schooling and so on," and my response was exactly that. There's more than one way because I had my brother and I started our own business in our 20s and built it up, sold it, and so you can, if you want to compare me to those other people, I bet none of them have done that. So what I'm saying is that you can you can get your business degree, you can do all these things, doesn't make you an expert until you've had the application and the experience.
Yeah.
On the other side, if you've taken a more experiential route and say you become an entrepreneur right out of high school or something, and in that case, hopefully and most likely you've also educated yourself in other ways, done the reading, been mentored, and so on. So there's no one right way. I think you can complement both of those styles. So I think it's just important to recognize under what conditions do you learn well, right? So to say that to be a good student and to get all the way up to a PhD, there's a certain kind of intelligence that's good for that, and then you'll have, like I just said before, that you have some of these people who've really educated who don't have a clue, but something that a guy with street cred who growing up in a rough neighborhood can be an expert in. So that's all I'd say, and I think that's kind of a theme today is on judging information, judging learning. I think it's important to recognize that you can learn from a lot of different situations. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I'm really happy about, that it's like that now. I mean, a few years ago I went to this career day at a high school, and you're talking about different career choices, and the kids are all nervous, what am I going to do and what's right or wrong. But it was so overwhelming from all of us who who have had careers, that you're never done. I mean, it's never too late or too early to start a career. I mean, the amount of people that are changing careers midlife and learning new stuff now, going to university in your 30s or 40s or 50s or whatever, it's so common, and it's totally okay. Interestingly, I mean, in my background in China, then there it's not okay. I mean, there it's you have one choice, and then if you're not on the train, it's kind of too late, which I feel very sad about. But what I experience here in Sweden now is that, I mean, my neighbor, he's I don't know how old, he's 40 something. He's gonna be a train driver, and he's just a totally new occupation.
Wow, that's great.
I have a colleague. She was working for a big organization for 20 years. A few years ago, she decided to become a psychiatrist. Went to university for 5 years. Now she's starting her own practice, and she's over 50. There's no limitations anymore, and that's something that I'm really happy about. That and even if you're not having great grades in high school, you can become Elon Musk or whatever if that's your thing. It's never too late, and there's so much different options and channels for education and learning, and it doesn't have to be a formal education. I totally agree with that. I mean, I went to uni, but I realized now that I was thinking about pursuing my doctors. I don't think I will, because I don't think it's the best way for me. But
Yeah.
For some people it works, but it doesn't have to work for everybody.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, with all respect to people who take that path and have that commitment, and certainly we need those people. It's just that's not the only way. So I think that I'm just trying to communicate a degree of openness, and so I think that's a great point. And the fact that learning never stops, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life until probably into my late 30s, into my 40s. I knew I had an idea of what I wanted to do probably in my 30s. Didn't really know how to get there. Was I going to re-educate myself in psychology or to become a counselor or whatever? And then I ended up. It wasn't until my 40s that I did got my coaching certification and did that whole program. And the reason that was, well, for one, I was just really ready for it and very curious, and I had a lot of life experience that led me there. But also, I still keep in touch with one of the trainers, Marcus Wadera, who really great instructor, also great coach. But the thing is, the program was a lot of information, but a lot of practical application, right? So, you go in, and you've got all these aspiring coaches who end up having to coach each other, right? So so there was taking in a lot of information, but also right away applying it. So I think if we can make sure that that's part of the whole learning process is really important, because you can have as much information as possible. If you don't know how to apply it, what good is it, right? So. Yeah. Okay, look, I tried to wrap it up a little bit ago, and as always, I ramble on. I get into tangents. Put a lid on it. Yeah. So, I want to get in the habit of kind of summarizing and wrapping up our conversations, because I think there's lots of good things that I learned from talking to you, and that maybe just come spontaneously out of our conversations. So I guess if you want to give listeners something to take away, what are your key points from today?
Well, one thing that we started to talk about that, and I think that's really important, is that there's a lot of different techniques for learning that we can experiment with, and really to enhance our focused learning, but also that mix them between focused and sort of diffused learning. But yeah, experiment with different techniques, and not making sure, but trying to put yourself up in a situation where you can get feedback on your learning. So you can always see it as a journey. You can see how much you actually develop. I think that's really important. So focused learning, utilizing some techniques, but making sure that you get feedback on your learning.
Those are great points. I think, and from my side, I think it's some of the things that I touched on were, you're never too old to learn. So just overcoming some of the barriers to learning include, assumptions about how old you are, when the right time is to learn, assumptions about yourself and your abilities. We talked about the whole mindset, growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Those are all really important. Recognizing your learning styles, knowing what style learner are you, and under what conditions do you learn the best, and I think really having a curiosity, as we talked about before, and having a real sense of openness to learning, and to other people, and to information. So I think those are really some really cornerstones to learning for me as well. And remembering that, that your learning is affected by your physiology, by, your approach, like how much time we spend focusing and so on. So I think if we can consider all of those things, we'll all be better learners. So recognize your biases, and your blind spots, and you'll find lots of great ways to learn.
Yeah, we can maybe maybe not next time, but another time we can talk more about the organizational aspect of learning. I think that's another kind of ballpark. We didn't go into that so much today, but that's also very interesting.
Yeah, it's a big topic. All of our topics are pretty big, and
but they all relate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we'll wrap it up there. Toby, thanks for taking the time to chat again today, and thanks everyone for joining us, for listening. Hopefully, this has enhanced your learning journey, or at least inspired you, or given you some tips on how to become a better learner. That's the reason we have these conversations, not only for to hear each other talk and to chat, but to share this knowledge and experience with other people. So. All right, we'll wrap it up there. Until next time, I guess next time my turn for a topic. Haven't decided yet, but until then, have a great couple weeks. We'll talk to you again soon. And for everyone else, thanks for joining us, and we hope that you tune into us again soon. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.